Here's how the night went by the numbers. With just one seat left to declare, the Conservatives have 364 MPs. Labour has 203, fewer than Michael Foot won in the disastrous 1983 election. The SNP will have 48 seats and the Lib Dems just 11. All that means that Boris Johnson will enjoy a majority of 78. The Tories have gained 47 seats on the 2017 result, while Labour have lost 59.
This, by all measure, in no uncertain terms, was an absolute, to take a British term, drubbing. Corbyn got crushed. And Labour, for the most part, was broken into 1,000 pieces and consumed, at which point it was extruded into a toilet, buried and thrown into space, at which point it went into the sun. Yes, it was that bad. It was a horrible, horrible result. It hurts to even think and watch this video. I get flashbacks to this day about watching the exit poll. Like that one. Flashback. It was bad. And because Corbyn was the head of that particular party, if you're a lefty, you already knows what's going to take place. That night, a hidden camera found Boris Johnson having a conversation with Jeremy Corbyn after the election results took place.
Silly punks, Batman owns the night. Now taste fear. Wait, what? Oh, God! Oh, my back just snapped like a pack of uncooked spaghetti! Oh, you just walk up and break my back without saying a word! Oh, boo!
Boo on you, sir! The boo on you, sir, is the thing that makes it special. Yes, I don't know why Jeremy Corbyn was walking around in a mask, but he did get broken that night. Thing is, immediately after the loss, you know what's going to happen. It was all Corbyn's fault. And I'll just let it be. There are several clips of this, by the way. I'm just choosing one. This person makes it that much more plain. McCrae.
Jeremy's manifesto, Jeremy is the leader, Jeremy's NEC, Jeremy's plan, called at Jeremy's time. And I can tell you on the doorsteps of Wakefield, they had two words, and they're not printable. They're not. I can't say them pre-Watershed about what they thought of that strategy.
Did he call you up to say sorry?
I've had no phone calls or messages from anyone in Jeremy or his team, which, given that I was in today, telling my staff that they're going to be redundant a week before Christmas, I think shows that we have in Jeremy a man without honour and without shame, and a type of preening narcissism that means that he thinks he's...
A man without honour, without shame, and preening narcissism. Preening narcissism. It was a brutal thing to watch. And I would imagine if you were one of those MPs that lost your job, you might have a bit of anger. And I would imagine that anger is probably going to be directed at somebody who is not yourself. And Jeremy Corbyn is the whipping boy for this very specific instance. But is that the entirety of the truth? All of the Blairites are going to come out of the closet and scream that it was Corbyn's fault, whether or not it was Corbyn's fault. The media, for the most part, that has been slandering and smearing Corbyn repetitively over the course of the last several years, they, of course, also is going to come out and scream it was Corbyn's fault. He was toxic. His strategies were too far to the left. Corbyn. But is it true? This is Chris Williamson. Now, I've told you on this channel that Corbyn was going to lose that election. Now, I told you he was going to lose the election because bad policies have infinitely predictable outcomes. And this particular policy being on Brexit. The Labour Party's position on Brexit was abominably absurd. And it showed when those people went to the polls. Labour took a position as if they were going to push for a second referendum, missing the point that I kept continuously making for months, that the election was the referendum. The parties were coming with what they wanted to do from the standpoint of Brexit. The public got the opportunity to choose. On this particular vote, however, Labour punted and started talking about other issues. Great policies under normal circumstances, but in this particular case, not relevant to the main subject matter, which is Brexit. In 2017, Labour was able to pull a rat out of a hat when Theresa May tried to do the exact same thing that happened to Batman, but instead of getting his back broke, Bane got his back broke, with Theresa May losing her majority and Jeremy Corbyn strutting like a peacock. Fate was not kind to Jeremy Corbyn on the second go-round, and I strongly put to you that a lot of that has to do with his position or non-position on Brexit. This is Chris Williamson. Chris Williamson is a massive supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. And unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn turned his back on Chris Williamson in addition to Galloway and got closer to people who hated his guts and would knife him in the back at first instance. Williamson is no longer a Labour MP. Williamson was drummed out because he is a supporter of Palestine, which makes him by definition anti-Semitic, at least by their logic and from the standpoint of their smearing jobs. Williamson is making a different argument. His argument is that people like Tom Watson sabotage Jeremy Corbyn and his run for Prime Minister. I'm going to let you listen to what Chris Williamson has to say. And at the end of it, I'm going to ask you two questions. Is he right, completely so, or does he have a point? Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. So, Chris Williamson makes the point that Corbyn was sabotage. I'm going to give you my position on this at the end of listening to Williams. But Tom Watson was deputy leader of the Labour Party. Now, this was Corbyn's right-hand man, but his right-hand man, for the most part, has his own agenda that was not necessarily in line with Corbyn's agenda. And those fault lines made themselves apparent over and over and over again. Listen to Williamson discuss the election and what he considers to be sabotage by Tom Watson. And again, as you listen to him, is he right? Or at the very least, does he have a point?
So I don't know if you just heard Neil Coyle talking about Jeremy Corbyn. He said even in Bermondsey, in the heart of metropolitan London, the name Jeremy Corbyn was toxic on the doorstep.
Well, I heard Neil, but look, Neil's been opposed to Jeremy Corbyn ever since he successfully got onto the ballot paper. He and many people in the Parliamentary Labour Party have sought to sabotage and undermine Jeremy's leadership. They've gone completely against the wishes of the party membership, who overwhelmingly elected Jeremy in the first instance, then re-elected him with an even bigger margin. He's completely and conveniently ignored the fact that under Jeremy's leadership, in spite of the worst possible run-in to an election campaign in my lifetime, probably ever, in 2017, we secured the biggest increase in vote share since 2017. Now, let's also remember that even in this election, which obviously didn't go well, Labour achieved a bigger proportion of the vote, and more people voted Labour than in any election, I think, since 2001. So he betted Tony Blair in 2005, he betted Gordon Brown, he betted Ed Miliband. But look, I mean, when you
but he also did, in terms of seats, he did worse than Michael Foot. I mean, you can't...
Okay, well, no, that's fine. I accept that point. And obviously, it was a disastrous night for the Labour Party, but the fault for that lies fairly and squarely with people like Tom Watson and the Parliamentary Labour Party, because they've, as I've already said, subjected Jeremy and the party membership to these relentless attacks and assaults. But of course, that's been
Hang on a second. Hang on a minute. Sorry, just interrupt you there for 1 second, Chris. Tom Watson received a death threat, as we just heard, as he told The Guardian, that he...
That's irrelevant. That is irrelevant. Somebody could have came to Tom Watson's house and then take a dump in the plant sitting on his front porch. it would be just as irrelevant as Tom Watson getting a death threat. I hope you understand what I mean. This is not a rah-rah death threat stuff. It's more so along the lines that the conversation that you're having with Chris Williamson is people like Tom Watson undermine Jeremy Corbyn and sabotage his election bid. That's his argument. What does Tom Watson have to do, getting a death threat have to do with that? Tom Watson, it's irrelevant to the conversation. It's bad that Tom Watson got a death threat. However, that has nothing to do with the point that Chris Williamson is making, that these guys who are supposed to be backing Corbyn up was effectively undermining him. Let's keep going.
He was never even told about by the leadership.
I've had death threats following the disgraceful smears that I was subjected to. But the point I was just going to go on to say, Matt, was that the parliamentary Labour Party have indulged, a large section of it anyway, malcontents who claim to be Democrats but don't accept the democratic will of the party membership, or indeed the vast majority of the British public. Because when you break down and look at Labour's policies individually, they're overwhelmingly popular. But these characters never got behind it. People like Neil never, ever got behind that, and as I've already said, sought to undermine it.
But he increased his share of the vote, so something obviously
worked.
Well have done. But hang on, he increased his share of the vote in Bermondsey, in his constituency. He got a bigger majority.
Maybe that was down to the fact that Labour's policy programme was very popular in Bermondsey. But look, what I wanted to just say was that, of course, these ongoing attacks were picked up by the media, and the media is almost universally hostile to the Labour Party, and of course they were accentuated in the media, these sorts of attacks. I mean, as we know, that Jeremy was attacked for his appearance, he was attacked as being somebody who was sexist, who was racist, who's always not a statesman, he's a communist spy, he's a security threat.
Hold on a minute, so let me
the British government paying, let's just get this point out there as well, but actually paying for a smear campaign effectively against Jeremy Corbyn.
The Guardian is not hostile. The Guardian newspaper.
What he just said was right. Integrity Initiative was... They discovered that there was a element within, not necessarily British government, but at the very least being paid by British government, essentially this kind of spy network that would use its connections in order to run these kind of social media attacks. But these attacks had real teeth. Supposedly getting somebody, if I remember correctly, removed from a position in Spain where the person was going to run in a particular election. But in this case, they call themselves fighting Russian propaganda, but usually often end up attacking Corbyn. This is the British government paying for this smear campaigns on Corbyn under the guise of fighting Russian propaganda. That's true.
Paper is not hostile to the Labour Party. The Guardian newspaper ran let me just finish. It ran an interview with Tom Watson, who we talked about, the former deputy leader, in which he talks about the hostile environment at the top of the Labour Party. He talks about brutality. He talks about all sorts of unpleasant things. What is your view of Tom Watson's view of your party?
Well, look, as I've already said, Tom has been the chief architect of the sabotage that the Labour Party has been subjected to. I remember going to the Labour Party conference in 2015 when indeed in his election campaign, I supported Tom Watson for the deputy leadership. He made it very clear that whoever was elected as leader, he would be their absolute support. That's the role of a deputy leader. But he's never ever done that. And he spoke at the 2015 conference talking about how he was proud that Labour was now very clearly and unambiguously an anti-austerity party, and he was going to get behind Jeremy Corbyn. Then he spent his entire time trying to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. But when you've got the whole panoply of the mass media, when you've got organisations like the Institute for Statecraft and the Integrity Initiative receiving millions of pounds, who are basically to indulge in a smear campaign against the leader of the opposition. I mean, where was the media outrage about that? That's absolutely disgraceful. Then you've got Mike Pompeo saying that Jeremy Corbyn was running the gauntlet.
Think about what he's saying for the moment, because he does have a point. You have an organization, a spy network, being paid by the British government that is using British money to attack the leader of the opposition in that government. And the media doesn't care one bit.
And they won't wait to push back. So you've got the American government involved in this.
So are you basically blaming everyone else apart from Jeremy Corbyn and the leadership of the Labour Party itself? So it's the media's fault, it's Tom Watson's fault, perhaps it's the voters' fault. Do you not take any responsibility for this crashing defeat?
All right, so Chris Williamson is like, look, all of these issues plagued us. Meaning you had the media that was decidedly against us. You had the Americans coming involved, putting their thumb on the scale. You had every little thing that would bubble up would get blown in these massive proportions with this notion of attacking Corbyn. At one point, they had him looking like a Soviet. At one point, they said, for the most part, he wasn't standing up for Britain when the Skripal poisoning took place, and he wanted to actually have an investigation to figure out what happened. How dare you, sir? They attacked him relentlessly. That's Williams' point. But his point goes further, that basically Blairites undermine Corbyn's chances of becoming prime minister. Now, this is going to go into a second framework where he's going to answer this stuff of, look, this is our faults, and these are the things that we could have done to make this work. But before going there, does he have a point? Does he have a point with this notion that there were people who were undermining Corbyn, who didn't want Corbyn to win? If you look back at the PMQs, Boris Johnson teased Corbyn about this all the time, saying that the people behind you didn't want you to win. I don't know who wants you to win this less, me or the people behind you. Those type of barbs. He wasn't making it up. He was not making it up. What is the most prevalent issue of undermining that you can think of from the standpoint of Corbyn? Now, my answer to this is 2 points. Yes, technically you're right, but no in the overall, because ultimately Corbyn was the leader of the opposition. It seemed that Corbyn had great ideas, but Corbyn was too weak to institute those ideas. And oftentimes, over and over again, he got pulled and pulled and pulled until he finally got into an unworkable position that there was no way for him to win election with. Think of this for the moment like you were thinking of politics in the United States. With the Democratic Party, especially the upper echelon, the establishment of the Democratic Party, as we call it, would they prefer Sanders or Trump? Now, understand, from the standpoint of the established wing of the party, whether it's Sanders or Trump, from their standpoint, Trump keeps them in business. Sanders doesn't. Just on the basic note of, I know people think these political discussions and these political fights and that, the Democratic Party is unified against Trump. Nonsense. If Sanders loses, the same thing that happened when Hillary Clinton lost would happen in reverse. It doesn't matter that John Kerry lost. It doesn't matter that Al Gore lost. It doesn't matter that Hillary Clinton lost. If one lefty loses, they're going to say, we told you, you went too far to the left. Exactly what they did with Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. And yes, the faction of the Democratic Party that would like to remain the main faction and established order of the Democratic Party cease to exist, at the very least from a standpoint of a controlling share, if Sanders gets elected. Also, you have this other weird quirk that if Sanders is a Democrat, then what the hell are you? Not to mention all of these years that incrementalism is the best thing that we could ever hope for. Incrementalism is the best thing that we could do. You can't win money without taking rich people's cash. Would all be shown to be a farce. I know from the standpoint of us little people, it looks like you would think that these two things are the same. But the reality of it is that it is not. Just like in the UK, or just like here in the United States, in the UK, you have some people's whose interests would be best served if Corbyn lost. The moment that Corbyn loses, he can no way hold leadership. Meaning the moment that he loses that race, he also loses his capacity to be a leader. The level of the loss creates a situation where there's a certain hysteria around. It's him, it's his fault, look how horrible and bad things have become. The catch of it is, though, for people like Blair, for people like these other Blairites that want to get back control of the party, do you think it's that horrid for them? Or do you think this presents them with an opportunity? In the same way that Hillary Clinton losing this race presented the left with an opportunity to exploit, saying you are not the most electable. You're not the person who's the adults in the room. You guys have lost to reality show hosts, 1,100 seats all throughout the United States. You've lost to maniacs. You've lost your legitimacy to remain in lead. That's the argument lefties made. Well, Blairites came back to make the exact same argument the moment that Corbyn lost. The moment that he lost. Truth is, though, that despite all of these things being thrown at Jeremy Corbyn, Corbyn's biggest issue was Brexit. Regardless of the subversion, the biggest subversion was Brexit. Because ultimately, I kept making the point that this is a referendum on Brexit. And you've ultimately abandoned the referendum. And you could see the canary in the coal mines when you would ask people on the streets and they would have such difficulty supporting Labour, hating the Brexit position of Labour. Labour lost seats in areas, coal mining areas, that they haven't lost for like 50 years. Brexit. The issue was Brexit. This notion that you were going to have a second referendum, then another referendum potentially for Scotland. Do you really think that the public was going to be on board for multiple referendums? They had a referendum. And fact of the matter is, Labour, because of the Blairites and Remainers, got pushed into a position of not accepting the referendum and instead wanted to expunge the first one and have a second one. The undermining of Labour had to do with the position on Brexit. The notion that Labour was going to go to the EU, send people who were Remainers who didn't believe in Brexit to the European Union, was going to come back and was going to put that deal up for a referendum with the secondary option of staying in the EU, with the leader of the opposition not taking a position on his own Brexit deal, and with the bunch of Remainers who worked for that deal going out and downing the deal to the public to try to get him to vote against it and staying in the UK, in the EU. The position made no sense. The biggest undermining was that. It was this pushing of Corbyn, eating at him, biting at him to get him to take a position on Brexit that was infinitely impossible to make work. This election was going to be on Brexit. And he was bringing issues of the NHS into it. The NHS, real issues. I just saw an article, Bojo was selling off the NHS despite what he told the public. And again, I said that also, that Bojo was lying through his teeth about that. But the issue of this election was Brexit. Bojo, one simple refrain, get Brexit done. The public wanted to give him a shot to do so. My answer to this is that Williamson is right in a technical sense that all of these things were against Corbyn. He is wrong in his other sense, because at the end of the day, it boils down to Corbyn. The overarching argument that's being made here, it's to some degree flawed. Corbyn was the beginning and end of it, regardless of the political pressure that was put on him by the other people who hated his guts. Corbyn had a majority and expanded his majority when they tried to take him out of office. He should have screamed mandate and went to make the party in the way that he needed the party to work, as opposed to having all these people trying to go after him. When they were making the anti-Semitic thing, Labour accepted the premise that they were anti-Semitic, which allowed all sorts of attacks and arguments on Labour saying you're anti-Semitic or you're harboring or allowing anti-Semitism. The guy who's literally an anti-racist being called anti-Semitic, but you accepted the original premise. And so now Labour is always doing a backstep on this issue without being assertive, making the point that we're not anti-Semitic at all. We're taking a policy position on a state. Let me let Chris Williamson finish his point.
Well, I think...
As someone who's close to Jeremy Corbyn.
Only an idiot would suggest that the media hasn't been involved in a smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. That's very, very clear. Only an idiot would say...
But is that what lost you the election?
Parliamentary Labour Party is being loyal. But yes, no, Jeremy did make mistakes. I think Jeremy should have defended his reputation much more rigorously than he sought to do, and indeed the Labour Party's reputation. He should have stood up to characters like Tom Watson and Neil Coyle and the rest of them, and frankly could have taken a lesson in leadership in many ways from Boris Johnson, who I...
Yes. And this is a lefty thing. Lefties like this kumbaya stuff, and they want to compromise and everything else. But at the end of the day, you have a political objective that you want to get accomplished. You have a lot of people who are absolutely and entirely against you in accomplishing that political objective, and you cozy it up to those particular people. You would have been better served, especially now, looking at what has just taken place with losing the election. You would have been better served with taking the heat and whatever else that was necessary by putting down those people who are against your interests, Tom Watson being one of them. Chris Williamson does have a point here in making a case that's saying, look, we made mistakes. And one of those mistakes was not being stronger in dealing with this element, this faction that was against getting things done. We should have accepted, and this is my own point, you should have accepted the referendum as if it was the word of God. And if that meant going against elements of your own party that were Remainers, then you should have done so. And you should have done so with the mantra that the public chose this, and I'm going to be the one that get this done. I don't care what's in the public chose. But you didn't do that. Ultimately, in one case after another, the issue was weakness. And that weakness found itself into be horrible results for Labour. I'll end this here. It's just painful to watch. And I do think Chris Williamson has a point. Like, share, subscribe. Weakness is not something, especially in politicians, that is typically rewarded. And I had been sounding the alarm. People thought I was attacking Corbyn. I wasn't attacking Corbyn. I was just trying to make the point that this looks bad, and if this keeps up, he's going to lose, and that the issue for the election is Brexit, not this other stuff, despite this other stuff being important. And moreover, one of the things that should have gotten across to people on the trouble that they were in is that Corbyn avoided election like a plague. It was only when the other parties relented and Labour was left being terrified of going into a snap election. Now you see why. Like, share, subscribe.